Welcome into a live edition of the Hawk Central podcast. I'm not Chad Leistico. I'm Tyler
Neither am I.
Chad is on vacation, so it will be myself and Dargan Southard. Dargan, we'll start off with the fact that you're coming off of a big championship win. Well, maybe not you personally, but your fandom. So, how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I am a prouder today than many other days. A Tennessee alum. After Monday night's title, the parade in Knoxville yesterday was pretty cool to see. Um, I covered a lot of Tennessee baseball early in my career when I was in school, and they were awful, like the worst team in the league year after year after year. So to see it actually materialize all the way into a national title is pretty crazy, and quite the difference. The team that I used to cover had quite the different year from the team that I cover now. So, yeah, it was cool to see. Always sad when the college baseball season comes to an end, though.
That the end of the game got a little dicey there. It was
Yes, it was sweating it out for sure.
Well, we'll start with as we speak on Wednesday, just recently, two staff moves, I guess, for Iowa women's basketball. Randy Henderson and Sean Sullivan, both being officially named to the staff. Henderson will serve as an assistant coach, and Sullivan will be an assistant coach slash general manager. Both of them with previous ties to Iowa. But I'll throw it to you, Dargan, obviously covering the program really closely. Just what background can you provide and your kind of thoughts on those hires?
Yeah, I think everybody thought Randy Henderson would be a name in the mix pretty early in this search. Just her ties here, the success that she's had in her coaching ventures, being a former Bluter and Jensen player, even for her senior year. And so you look at what she's done, and I think really the thing that stands out for me is in a situation where you have somebody becoming a head coach for the first time in such a large setting. The fact that Henderson has spent the last 7 years at Washington University, and before that, she was the head coach at Cove from '06 to 15. So that's almost 15 plus years experience of being a head coach. And obviously, and Washington University aren't Iowa, but just the flow of a week, a game day, even with somebody who knows what being a head coach entails on staff, to me is the biggest element of this announcement, just because, I think it was probably a priority for Jane Jensen if she could to get somebody with extensive head coaching experience, because that's obviously an area that she, one of the few areas that she doesn't have any experience in. So from that perspective, I think it definitely checks all the boxes there. And then, the Sean Sullivan move is interesting because that's kind of, I guess, your de facto Jenny Fitzgerald replacement, or at least, why there's another opening there. And obviously Jenny was big on scouting and big on preparation and all that. All the coaches are, but her in particular. And so it seems like based on his resume and where he's been, that's kind of going to be a lot of his department, is the scouting and just the preparation ahead of games and whatnot. So he's worked at North Carolina, Pitt, and Penn State, and was a 4-year manager at Iowa as an undergrad. So, I think if they had Iowa ties, that was kind of a bonus, I feel like. But the fact that they do, and the fact that they seem to fit exactly into the open positions and what's important there, I think you come away with this feeling pretty good about the whole transition of it all.
Yeah, and in that transition, it felt like just Jan Jensen was a natural fit to take over for Lisa Bluter. But I guess if you look at one of the downsides of that is that now you don't have Jan Jensen as an assistant coach anymore, and you kind of have to, because she was just invaluable, to Lisa Bluter as, almost like a right-hand man sort of. And now you have to try to fill that, and, hoping that maybe some of the staff moves, as were announced Wednesday, can help do that. But to me, it just kind of fits into this whole question of like, what is next for Iowa women's basketball? Because there was already, take away the fact that Lisa Bluter is leaving, but let's say Lisa Bluter was still saying was still at Iowa. There were major questions of like, what does Iowa women's basketball look like post Caitlin Clark? And that was a big question of like what is it going to be like for the program? How do you kind of try to continue that momentum without her? And now you throw into the fact that just an incredibly successful head coach leaves. Now there's even more changes on the staff as well as kind of a domino effect of that. But like what is Dargan? Do you feel like is realistic expectations this upcoming season? Because there's just so much change. Not only are you losing a generational player, not just for the program, but just like the history of college basketball, but you have all these staff changes as well. Like what do you feel like is realistic kind of going into this season in terms of what is expected from this team?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of what everybody who's followed and supports this program is wondering is just where does the next wave of Iowa women's basketball kind of fit in the overall landscape of the sport? And, I've kind of gone back over some schools that, kind of popped up and not randomly, but based on their history, it was unexpected for them to make the Final Four and go to, even the national championship game. The team that I found that really kind of fits this is Mississippi State women's basketball. They went to back-to-back title games, lost to South Carolina in 17, lost to Notre Dame in 18. And, they had some tournament years after that and stayed, above average women's basketball program. But now, they're kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit in the SEC. And then kind of the extreme end, I guess, would be Oregon women's basketball after Sabrina Ionescu left. They have just completely cratered and are now like one of the worst teams in the Pac-12. So not to say that that's going to be what happens here, but it does offer, this is something that, programs in the past have had to wrap their heads around when they have kind of this pop-up massive successes. Okay, how do we move this forward without creating unrealistic and unreasonable expectations? And so I think one thing that I feel that's definitely going to be there to start, once the games start going and if the wins, there's struggles on the court, this might change. But I feel like generally speaking, this upcoming team is going to get some grace and some patience with the fan base and with everybody, because as much as what is staying the same and is similar big picture, there's going to be differences kind of on the more dialed in level of how this all comes together. And so it can really go a lot of different ways in terms of like an expectation. I think, making the NCAA tournament feels like kind of the middle. And, maybe I would guess maybe the ceiling for next year is being in the hosting discussion, whether they actually get one or not. I think if they're kind of in that 4 or 5 seed range, then that feels like, maxing out this next season. And then obviously, it could go the other way too. We mentioned Iowa baseball earlier. Like that was a year that looked like it was specifically going to go a certain way and went completely different. So, Caitlin Clark has, in her matching pretty much every moment and success benchmark that she had, kind of created this thing that everything was going to go right all the time. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, I think it is. I think Jan Jensen is kind of is a good figure to handle all of this transition because, in a way, like it kind of is good that it's happening all at once because, if Bluter stays, 2 or 3 more years and you just feel like you cleared the Caitlin transition and now all of a sudden you have a coaching change as well. I think in a way it could work out to where you kind of get all this at once, move on to the next phase of the program. And there should be a lot of confidence that it's going to be a successful run coming up as well.
And you can also feel good about the fact that you're bringing back Hannah Stolke, you're bringing back Sydney Falter, Taylor McCabe. Like to me, those are the 3 kind of like core returners. And then of course you add in Lucy Olson. So I feel like there's definitely pieces there, to have a successful season. We'll move on to Iowa football. Some news from a few days ago, and I'm going to pull up the story here just to make sure that I'm saying things correctly. But Caleb Brown arrested early Sunday morning, multiple charges, including an OWI. As police report said that Brown allegedly had bloodshot, watery eyes, slurred speech, poor balance. And then, according to police, Brown was also had a fake driver's license. So, I guess the first thing is that comes to your mind in this kind of situation is you're glad that no one was seriously injured. You're glad that people were healthy out of it. But moving on to the more, I guess, football end of it is that Caleb Brown was a guy that heading into the season was probably going to be your one of your top receivers, a real threat in a position group that a lot of uncertainty, a new position coach as well. So it's obviously not a good development. We've yet to hear specifically from Kirk Ferentz, Caleb Brown about a potential punishment. But Dargan, just your thoughts on where this could lead and kind of the potential fallout that Iowa will have to deal with as a result of it.
Yeah, so as with a lot of discussion topics in today's society, people have trouble grasping that two things can be true at once. And I think this is a situation that kind of embodies that because, yes, you're right. Obviously, if you're driving around drunk, um, it could go very badly and very poorly. And Caleb Brown is lucky that none of that happened. At the same time, you know, is this like the worst thing that could possibly ever happen? No. And I think there are examples recently of where something like this for a person is a blip on the radar, so to speak. The one that comes to mind pretty clearly is Tristan Wirfs. Tristan Wirfs had a DUI on a moped, which could argue is much more dangerous to drive drunk than a car. Got a DUI just right before the season started. I think it was before the 2018 season. Was suspended for the opener, and then came back. And as everyone has known, he's been pretty much a high character guy everywhere he's been. So I think it's definitely possible that this is something that moving forward doesn't really become that big of a deal for Caleb Brown. But I do agree that the optics of it are not great, and that you have a guy who is so pivotal to the team. A guy who seems to be ascending into a leadership role gets in that kind of stuff. And so, he had to wear it for a few days. Obviously, the flip side of being an Iowa football player, a lot of great privileges, but if you get a DUI, there's going to be about 10 articles about it, especially if you're a key player. So, you got to wear it on Twitter, wear it on social media for a little bit. But I think there's a reasonable path to this being something that you look back and be like, okay, that was clearly an outlier of, everything going on.
Yeah, and I mean, just there's so many questions around the wide receiver room going into the season anyway. Obviously last season losing Deontay Vines, Nico Ragaini, and then Jacob Bostic kind of being a late departure that kind of added even more uncertainty to things. But this is a position group that's just struggled in recent history. It's been a part of kind of Iowa's offensive downfall, in the last few seasons. So, but you felt good about possibly Caleb Brown. He was a guy that came in from Ohio State, high expectations going into last season. He got off to a really slow start, but then in the latter stages of the season really turned it on and felt like a guy that, flashed potential. And changes this offseason. Kelton Copeland not retained on staff. John Budmeyer promoted internally, which was a move that was not universally praised by the fan base, just given John Budmeyer's lack of extensive experience coaching wide receivers. So this just adds kind of another hurdle into what Iowa's offense is going to look like. And then on top of that, you have Tim Lester, new offensive coordinator. So it sounds like super simplistic, but it's like a huge question for Iowa going into the season is who's going to be throwing the ball and catching the ball. Like, can Iowa throw and catch the ball? Something that they really couldn't do last season. And I think it's, one guy who jumps to the top of my list of importance, depending on, where this Caleb Brown situation goes, is like Seth Anderson. He's a guy that I felt like showed flashes last season, kind of fell into the shadows a little bit when Caleb emerged toward the back end of things. But he's a guy that you would really like to take an increased role. You bring in Jacob Gill from Northwestern. He hasn't had a ton of production at the college level, but maybe someone that's not quite as obvious that I would look at to try to fill in maybe some of that production is Addison Estrenga, Luke Lachey, a tight end that gets a ton of attention. But Addison Estrenga, with all the tight end injuries last season, he really filled in. He did a good job filling in. I feel like he's a guy that can make strides going into this season. So I guess we're just right now just kind of waiting and seeing what the next steps are for Caleb Brown. If it's a 2-game suspension, and like I said, we don't know at this moment in time. If it's 2, that means he misses the Iowa State game, which would be fairly significant. If he misses 1, he'd be back for the Iowa State game. So obviously still waiting to get those details kind of ironed out in the next several weeks. But Dargan, anything else to add on that front? Or
yeah, I was just going to say, it doesn't mean it's going to go like this, but there was actually 2 alcohol incidences that summer, Wirfs and another one. And both those guys got, I believe, 1-game suspensions for the opener. And I feel like I think that's what Kirk has done in a lot of these cases. So I would feel pretty confident that he's going to be out for the opener. I would be a little surprised, I guess, if it extends beyond that, but you never know.
We'll move on to some positive, some good news for Iowa football. I traveled to Southeast Polk on Sunday for the charity softball game. Wishes on deck. Spoke to Cade McNamara briefly. He's been fully cleared, physical activity. So this is what he told me. Football-wise, running-wise, conditioning, everything, I've been fully cleared. So obviously this a very kind of encouraging update. Cade McNamara's health, something that him staying healthy, a big storyline going into the season. Dargan, just what do you make of that? Obviously, there's still things that kind of play out in terms of him finally getting on the field and not only getting on the field, but staying on the field for an entire season. But your just initial thoughts on hearing that and what it could kind of mean moving into the fall.
So first, I want your top 5. I want your power rankings of Iowa football, baseball ability, or softball ability.
I was going to get into this after, but we can jump into that right now.
Yeah.
So Iowa won 11-3, and it was honestly, I don't even know if 11-3 does it justice. It was pretty dominant. Now, the guys that did a lot of the heavy lifting for Iowa, Addison Estrenga, 3 home runs, and he was just blasting them. He was an absolute beast. And Xavier Wampa had 2 home runs. So those were the 2 guys like doing the heavy lifting. And Wampa was in center. And Wampa was like, I could like see him being a really good center fielder. He was fast. He was taking like really good reads to the ball. So I guess usually in baseball you say you're good up the middle, and like that's where you want a shortstop, center field, catcher, pitcher. Iowa was pretty good there. Now I will say, Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, phenomenal linebackers.
I was going to ask, who has 0 baseball ability?
Phenomenal linebackers. As far as their softball abilities, a little to be desired, in my opinion.
Swinging? I assume they were struggling at the plate.
It was at the plate. And honestly, they weren't bad in the field, but it's like, when you're, in Little League or whatever, usually put like, I guess the not as good players like in the corner outfield. Like you try to kind of hide them in the
right field.
Right field.
Yeah.
That's where they were both, they were both left and right field. Now they did a fine job in the field, but it's funny how like good you can look at one sport and then just how out of place, especially with like baseball or softball, because it's so niche. But so that's my softball recap. 11-3 Iowa win. It was a fun time. So what Cade McNamara, which is probably what people would people are more interested in pertaining to the actual football
Right.
season. But
I feel like this is kind of like, the first baseline step that had to happen. He had to get through the off season, and the rest of the end of last season in the recovery, and have everything check out. That was kind of getting, in a way, just to the starting line of, trying this all again, that last year obviously didn't materialize. I think it's the thing that I would wonder is, just obviously, Cade, to be a Big Ten quarterback, your mental makeup has to be pretty strong. But, I would have to think that this whole ordeal has, dented that even a little bit, just because of how frustrating I'm sure it's been to have these, injuries one after another pop up. So, I feel like that, he's going to get every shot, obviously, to show that he's, ready to roll, and good to go, and all that. And, as much as Iowa's offense kind of just all got thrown together last year is awful. I do think, looking back, the little bit that Cade McNamara did play last year, there were some signs in that action that, it doesn't have to be as painful as it was for the bulk of the year. So, I understand the cautious optimism at best, maybe, from Iowa fans on this, just because it's been a multi-year ordeal trying to find somebody competent at quarterback, and it's not really happened. So, I think it's fair to wonder what the ceiling is actually of this coming year, of Iowa, with Cade McNamara, healthy Cade McNamara. But I do think there is a path to this year being productive, and the offense looking, not that it can really look any worse, but looking more like a college football offense should, with him under center.
it's interesting you bring up the kind of mental side of things, because that's actually the side that I would be less worried about him. I feel like the physical part and staying healthy is the bigger question, because he's been through a lot. Like the last 2 seasons, he had a season-ending injury in his last season at Michigan, then last season the ACL against Michigan State. So back-to-back season-ending injuries, which is, and this was like major injuries too. So this wasn't like a twisted ankle or anything. I think, I mean, and this is what he said, which I think kind of speaks to maybe his mental strength and resilience. That he says it's been a battle. So this is, about what the last few months have been after the ACL injury against Michigan State. He said it's been a battle dealing with that level of adversity again. It's tough, but I feel like these have been some of the most, honestly, really life-changing 8 months I've had in my life. So I'm just excited to get back out there. So I feel like, I mean, he's been through the ringer, and you feel like if he can get through this mentally, he can get through a lot of different things. My kind of big question going into the season is like, does he, maybe for the lack of a better word, have like sort of a career rebirth? Because he came, he was at Michigan, had success there, led them to a college football playoff, and that seems like maybe a long time ago at this point in time, but like that's something that he has on his resume. He led Michigan to a Big Ten championship, but it's been so long since he's done that. Does he have like another kind of wave in his career? It's been kind of on a downward trend since he took them to a college football playoff. But is he able to kind of have a rebirth of his career, able to kind of bring it back up? Staying healthy is one thing. I feel like there's less pressure on it this season because you brought in Brendan Sullivan, which was just, it's hard to really understate how big of a addition that was, of just feeling like you have some experience and some depth in the quarterback room. But you want Cade to be the guy, and I feel like, he has definitely a higher ceiling in terms of what he can provide Iowa's offense than Sullivan. But you feel okay now, just much better about where the quarterback room than it was, 2-3 months ago.
Yeah, and I think that is important to remember, that like Cade McNamara has played high level football, and has played high level football well And the ceiling for him at Iowa is certainly reasonable to say it's higher than a lot of anybody else that's come in the last probably 3 seasons. So I think that's definitely a option on how this year could go. And remember, like Iowa doesn't need him to come in and throw 60 touchdowns next year. Like they just need a pulse on offense, and everything else should go into play. And I think one thing that could definitely happen is if McNamara does have a good start to the year and the offense looks competent, that's just going to be such a breath of fresh air for Iowa fans that I could see them really, not that they aren't already, but really kind of gravitating to McNamara and him becoming one of the more kind of focal figures on the team and in the program even more so, just because it's desperate times in terms of offensive stability and success. And I do agree that Cade McNamara is clearly option one and clearly the best option right now.
And it feels like the offense just imagine if it can get some like positive momentum. And I know this is like theoretical at this time, but there just hasn't been a whole lot to like feel good about within the unit the last few seasons. And if you can like start stacking some just average performances, and confidence is just a huge thing in sports. And if you can start to play with a little bit of confidence, a little bit of swagger, I think a lot more things could fall into place than maybe people realize. And then can Iowa make a college football playoff? I asked, sort of a centric question to Jay Higgins about that. Like, what is this team capable of? He feels like making the 12-team expanded playoff is realistic goal. And here's Cade McNamara's a guy that's been there. He's been to the college football playoff when it was 4 teams, so he has that experience. But yeah, so just I guess an encouraging kind of update from Cade as we continue to move toward the first game of the season. I just wanted to quickly touch on Iowa recruiting wise. The last several days, adding a handful of commitments. Mason Woods of Iowa City West, son of special teams coordinator LeVar Woods, committing. Also a pair of offensive linemen, a cornerback C.J. Bell, and also Brad Fitzgibbon. So kind of the major one. There's more than one still left, but the major one is Jose Epinesa, legacy recruit, brother of AJ Epinesa, but that's still to be announced. But he'd kind of be the crowning piece of the class. Dargan, anything else? How excited are you about EA's new college football game? There's been kind of some details trickling out recently. How are you feeling about that?
I'm excited. I did see the toughest stadiums list yesterday. That was complete garbage in every element. They managed to piss off Big Ten fans, SEC fans, all Big 12 fans, it was terrible. I mean, A&M is not the toughest place to play. The Big Ten people, I've never been to Camp Randall, but the Big Ten people, Iowa people are like, yeah, that's absurd that it's on there. So I'll take their word for it on that one. But overall, yeah, it should be exciting. Going to unite a lot of people over this summer here whenever it comes out. And I think it's cool that the college guys are as excited about it as they are because, they're going to kind of always be known as the guys in the first one back, assuming that, this is something that can continue without disruption like before. So should be a fun one later this summer.
On Wednesday, which is the day as we speak, there was a Sights and Sounds deep dive video released, and there was a short clip of Iowa swarming onto the field. So it's Cade McNamara was in there, Jay Higgins, Sebastian Castro, and then also the stripe out. So apparently looks like the stripe out will be in the game. And they actually showed in that like video clip, there was the Kinnick press box. It looked pretty realistic, like from many accounts. So
Yeah, I think the graphics and I think the attention to detail.
Yeah.
Aside from Texas State, I don't know if you saw that, but they
Oh, I did see something.
they
Yeah.
just chopped the upper deck off of their stadium. But I think it's gonna be cool. I think the attention to detail like that is one of the better elements of the game.
Well, I think we covered some pretty good ground. Dargan, any closing thoughts, final shout outs to Tennessee baseball or
No, I'm good on the shout outs. So.
all right, well, we appreciate everyone tuning in. I hope Chad is having a good vacation. Shout out to my mom as well, who's retiring this week.
Shout out Tyler's mom.
Proud of you for that. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.